48 ඇතුළත මල්වීරෝස මහත්තයා ඉන්න තැනක් අපිට හොයලා දෙන්න මාධ්‍යවේදීන්ට හොයලා දෙන්න අපි වටිනා පංචායතයක් තෑගි දෙනවා එතුමා ඉන්න තැනක් අපිට හොයලා දුන්නා.
Agreements will not be signed, claims the government.
ඕනම කෙනෙක් එනකොට අපි පොරොන්දු මත එන්නේ නැහැ. එයාට එන්න පුළුවන් අපේ යුතුයකමක් තියෙන ඕනම කෙනෙක්ට සලකන.
Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement for Geospatial Cooperation between India and the United States signed. A cargo ship sailing from South Africa to China anchored at the east terminal of the Colombo port.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News on TV1. On to your lead story now. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrived in the country this evening. The Foreign Ministry said that the US Secretary of State arrived in the island on an invitation extended by Foreign Minister Dinesh Gunawardena. Secretary of State Pompeo is the highest level of US dignitary to visit Sri Lanka during the tenure of US President Donald Trump.
Issuing a statement, the US Embassy in Colombo said that the motive of the visit would be to stress the commitment of the United States to partner with a strong and sovereign Sri Lanka. According to the embassy, the US Secretary of State will hold talks on establishing a free and open Indo-Pacific region with a common objective. Pompeo is scheduled to participate in diplomatic discussions with local officials tomorrow. He is expected to hold talks with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and Foreign Minister Dinesh Gunawardena and later take part in a joint media briefing. Following the official meetings, Pompeo is expected to visit the St. Anthony's Church in Kochikade. The US Secretary of State is due to visit the Maldives and Indonesia as well. Pompeo was initially expected to visit Sri Lanka in June last year before cancelling such plans. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is currently the chairperson of the Board of Directors of the Millennium Challenge Corporation or the MCC. He previously served as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency from January of 2017 to April of 2018. Pompeo has also served as a congressman in the US state of Kansas on 4 occasions. Before his service in Congress, Pompeo founded a specialized aircraft machinery manufacturer named Thayer Aerospace, where he served as CEO for more than a decade.
He will be having bilateral discussions with His Excellency the President on numerous issues, and thereafter he will also be having bilateral discussions with the Foreign Minister tomorrow, and then he is expected to leave to Maldives. This is a regional visit by the Honourable Secretary, and we are glad that he is also coming to Sri Lanka at this juncture, and then we believe that this is a good opportunity to us to strengthen our bilateral ties with the United States of America.
US State Secretary Mike Pompeo's visit to Sri Lanka figured during today's cabinet media briefing.
Sri Lankaවේ විදේශ අමාත්‍ය ගරු දිනේෂ්
He is expected to arrive in the country based on an invitation extended by Sri Lankan Foreign Minister Dinesh Gunawardena. He will remain in the country for about 16 to 17 hours. During that period, we will seek to strengthen bilateral ties and arrive at bilateral agreements. Our talks were based on these factors.
අන්නෝට එන්නටත් ඒ සාකච්ඡාවන් මුල් කරගෙන කටයුතු කරන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා.
ඩොලර් මිලියන 500ක ණයක් ප්‍රදානයක් ඇමරිකාවෙන් ලබා දීමක් සම්බන්ධයෙන් සාකච්ඡාවක් වුණාද? එහෙම යෝජනාවක් තියෙනවද?
අපට මේ අවස්ථාවේදී
We can obtain financial aid or grants at this time. We will hold talks with all countries by maintaining a clear stance.
පැහැදිලි ස්ථාවරයකින් දෙන්න කියලා සාකච්ඡා කරනවා.
Several factions today alleged that there is a link between the arrival of the US Secretary of State and the 20th Amendment to the Constitution.
The 20th Amendment was approved on the 22nd of this month. Exactly a day after, that is on the 23rd of October, the US Embassy in Sri Lanka announced that the US Secretary of State will visit the island. Clearly, there is a link between these two developments.
Suspicions have arisen as to whether the US State Secretary's visit to Sri Lanka is linked to the 20th Amendment to the Constitution.
මයික් පොම්පියෝ මහතා ඔබ
Mike Pompeo was formerly a director of the CIA, so he will arrive in the country in an intimidating manner. The state secretary is visiting the island after the conclusion of a general election after the 20th Amendment was passed and the barrier on dual citizens to enter politics was removed. What is the objective of his visit?
පුරසිභාවයේ අනුමත වෙලා තියෙන වෙලාවක මේ එන උමනා මොකද්ද?
මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ඔවුන් ඇවිල්ලා
The visit is expected to further strengthen the relationship between the two countries. There is no need to be suspicious or have any doubts in this regard.
ඔය ඒ රට පිළිබඳව සැකයක් ඇති කර ගැනීමට අවශ්‍ය කාරණයක් නොවන බව සඳහන් කරනවා.
The Janata Vimukti Peramuna staged a protest against the US State Secretary's visit to Sri Lanka opposite the US Embassy in Colombo today. The demonstration was staged under the theme Hands Off Sri Lanka's Sovereignty, Sri Lanka doesn't need foreign intervention.
මයික් පොම්පියෝ ලංකාවට එන්නේ නිකම්ම නෙමෙයි.
Mike Pompeo is not visiting Sri Lanka without a purpose. They say the motive is to establish a free region in Asia. That means Mike Pompeo is visiting Sri Lanka in a bid to control the Asian region based on the whims and fancies of the United States. When GL Pires is questioned on the visit, he responds by saying that Pompeo is visiting Sri Lanka on his way back to the United States. Clearly, Mike Pompeo is visiting Sri Lanka as part of the power struggle between two world powers. Our government has fallen prey to the wishes of the US government. A large number of US military personnel arrived in the country without being subjected to quarantine regulations before Pompeo's arrival. The US has shamelessly declared it is making this tour in a bid to counter China's global threat. Their motive is very evident. They have made that clear. The President or the Prime Minister have not officially announced that the MCC agreement will not be signed. Pompeo will be visiting Sri Lanka to discuss that and make a final decision.
ලංකාවත් එක්ක ගිවිසුම් අත්සන් කරන්න සාකච්ඡා කරන්න ඒ අවසන් පියවර ගන්න තමයි මේ පොම්පියෝ ලංකාවට එන්නේ. මයික් පොම්පියෝ මෙහෙට එනකොට මේ ඉන්න මයික් පිම්පියෝ අද කටවල් වහගෙන ඉන්නවා. එදා බොරුවට කෑ ගහපු අය.
The individuals who raised false concerns over these matters are remaining silent over the MCC agreement or the second stage of the SOFA agreement.
අද MCC ගිවිසුම් අත්සන් කරද්දි සෝෆා ගිවිසුමේ දෙවෙනි පියවරට යද්දි ඒ ගැන කතාවක්වත් නැහැ.
The protesters handed over a letter to the US Embassy as well. In a letter addressed to the US Ambassador, the JVP said it does not believe that the visit of US State Secretary Mike Pompeo is to do with a commitment to a strong, independent and democratic Sri Lanka. It claimed that the US has consistently sought to bring Sri Lanka under its influence and to drag the country into an unnecessary and a costly global and regional power play. The JVP said it is well aware that the US is willing to violate every democratic and international norm when it comes to protecting its interests.
Meanwhile, the former MP Venerable Badde Gama Samita Thero engaged in a silent protest in Galle today to oppose the visit of the US Secretary of State. The protest was staged opposite the main bus depot in Galle.
We will not engage in the protest violating health guidelines. This is why we have not summoned other factions to join us. The US Secretary of State is traveling across the world and urging other countries to stand against China. Sri Lanka has no reason to go against China. Sri Lanka has no reason to stand against the US either. We are independent. We have no reason to be suppressed by another country. We urge all of them to return to their homeland without interfering into our matters.
අද දින අප විසින් ගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමා වෙත සංදේශයක් සකස් කළා බාර දීම සඳහා.
We prepared a memorandum to be handed over to the President. We also have some sort of suspicion regarding the sudden visit of US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to Sri Lanka. Foreign officials have not leveled threats and visited the country. We believe that the MCC agreement is dangerous to the country. I believe that the government will be discussing this matter with the US official. Therefore, the government has a duty to issue a clear statement that the US State Secretary is visiting the country due to this reason. We remain silent these days to see what would happen. However, this morning we were informed that there is something serious about this. The US is taking steps to loot the natural mineral resources of the country. We have learned that intelligence units have gathered a large amount of information on this. At the same time, we have received complaints from the people in the northern and eastern regions stating that the aircraft that arrived in Sri Lanka in the recent past had carried out surveillance in their areas. Sometimes this visit may be paid due to the economic downfall that the country is facing. There is suspicion as to how the country experienced a sudden surge in COVID-19 cases. The COVID-19 pandemic that had been brought under control had raised its head suddenly and had affected the economy. Therefore, we are suspicious whether they are trying to force the government to sign the agreement. We wish to urge the US to refrain from creating conflicts in our country.
සූදානම් වෙන්න එපා කියන පණිවිඩය අපි ඇමරිකා එක්සත් ජනපදයට දෙනවා.
අද කැබිනට් මාධ්‍යමෝදී හැබැයි ප්‍රකාශයක් වුණා මේ කියනවා මොකද මහතා නිව්සුම් ඔක්කොම NCC වගේ එක නිව්සුම් නම් අස්සම් කරන්නේ නැහැ කියලා.
එයා කවුද කියන්නේ එහෙම?
Who is he to make such remarks? Have they made valid remarks previously? Therefore, the President and the Prime Minister who govern the country are the ones who must be speaking about this. We have not forgotten the remarks he made in the past.
මේ දවස්වල කතා කරපුවා අපිට මතකයි.
ඔවුන්ගෙන් සාකච්ඡා කරන්න ඉස්සෙල්ලා
Before discussing it with them, I don't know whether the cabinet discussed about this in the first place. Simply because they received a 2/3 majority, we don't know whether the government will bring down spies to obtain their opinion and then sell the country to them. Therefore, we wish to clearly state that the US State Secretary is not visiting the country with a good intention. There is nothing good for our country in this. We do not know what will happen in the end after they continue to suppress the country. If the government that we form does not conduct themselves in an ad hoc manner and instead consults us and the people before making decisions, I wish to state that it is favorable for them. If they act based on their whims and fancies in a haphazard manner, we will be compelled to resort to some form of action.
වර්තමාන ආණ්ඩුවට සහාය දුන්නේ සියලු දේශපාලන කඳවුරු ඔවුන් තමයි මේ රටට අපිට ඉගැන්වුවේ ඇමරිකානු බීතිකාව මේ MCC බීතිකාව.
All political camps that supported the current government into power were the ones that taught us about the threat of the US and instilled fear over the MCC agreement. However, we now have a question whether they raised these concerns as a bait to garner votes. The US State Secretary, who leveled absurd allegations against our army commander without any form of investigation or inquiry, is now visiting the country in which Shavendra Silva is serving as the army commander. If the government is attempting to implement agreements such as the MCC, SOFA and AXA and to draw the country backwards, then there is no difference between the current administration and Ranil Wickremesinghe's good governance government. Just as they made a deal with Rishad and Hakim to obtain their support for the 20th Amendment, we believe that they inked a secret pact with the US. The current government created a strange position that would allow Basil Rajapaksa to exercise the executive powers of the Prime Minister. He is a person who holds dual citizenship. His conduct is very subtle. Therefore, a very big question lies before us now. We want to know what is the drama that is being acted out by the group, including Basil Rajapaksa, who has pledged allegiance to the US by bringing down US agents.
බැසිල් රාජපක්ෂලා ඇතුළු මේ කණ්ඩායම මේ ඇමරිකානු ඒජන්තවරු මේ රටට ගෙනල්ලා මේ නටන නරි නාඩගම මොකක්ද කියලා ගම්මන්පිල මහත්මයා කියලා තිබ්බා. පොම්පියෝ මහත්මයා එන්නේ ලංකාවට MCC අත්සන් කරන්න නෙමෙයි කියලා.
Gammanpila had said that Pompeo is not arriving in Sri Lanka to sign the MCC agreement. When Gammanpila makes such remarks, we are afraid that he will have to change his views if Gotabaya develops a sudden sense of affection towards that. The so-called patriots seem to have been trapped in their own pits now.
ප්‍රේමීයෝ රිංගපු ගුල් වලින් එළියට එන්න බැරි තත්ත්වයට පත් වෙලා තියෙනවා. වෙස් බැඳලා එළිය නටන්න පටන් ගත්තාම හෙළුවෙන් තමයි මේ ආණ්ඩුවට නටන්න වෙන්නේ.
The Samagi Jana Balavega expressed their views on the response of certain ruling party factions regarding the US State Secretary's visit to Sri Lanka.
මෙන්න එක දේශප්‍රේමී පොම්පේ මහත්තයා ගැන කියන්නේ මේ වීරවංශ මහත්තයා. මේ වීරවංශ මහත්තයා එදාසල පොම්පේ මහත්තයා ගැන කියපු කරන්දරේ.
This is what Vimal Veerwansa told back then. I urge the public to assist the journalists in locating Vimal Veerwansa's whereabouts during the next 48 hours. I will award anyone. Even Sita Armepula said the foreign delegate is arriving in the country to take our lands and cut our trees. Try locating Sita Armepula during the next 48 hours. What about the Panama Canal Udaya Gammanpila spoke about? Find his whereabouts as well during the next 48 hours. Mike Pompeo is the chairman of the MCC. They clearly mentioned the objectives of their visit to India, the Maldives and Indonesia, but they never spoke about Sri Lanka. Is he dangerous and is our country in danger? These are the questions of the general public that do not have any answers.
හැබැයි මනතුරක් රට අනතුරේ කියන ප්‍රශ්නයක් රටේ ජනතාවට තියෙනවා. ඒකට අද උත්තරයක් නැහැ.
Minister Udaya Gammanpilla responded to allegations made by several parties against the government during the cabinet media briefing today.
You previously said that the purpose of US State Secretary Mike Pompeo's visit to Sri Lanka is to set up a military base. Does that statement stand until today? No, the previous government made arrangements to sign the SOFA agreement. That was prevented due to heavy objection that was raised in the country. The current government will not sign the MCC or SOFA agreement under any circumstances. Both sides must express their consent for an agreement to come into effect. One entity cannot do it all alone. You once said that the US State Secretary visits countries to fulfill a particular motive. Does the remark that you made while in the opposition stand until today? No, I clearly said that the previous government had made arrangements to sign the SOFA agreement. There will be no obstruction to establish a US military base in Sri Lanka if both countries agree to that. The people of this country defeated the previous government and gave us a 2/3 majority since they were aware of the danger it might pose. The Samagi Jana Balawaya responded to claims that the previous government attempted to sign the MCC agreement. The MCC agreement was only put forward to the cabinet. It was not tabled in parliament. That could not proceed as there was opposition against it. The process was halted as a result of that. We saw that the process was halted due to pressure not within the government but from external factions. Your government attempted to sign the agreement before the election. No, we did not attempt to sign that. We wanted to table it in parliament and then debate about it. We did not ink secret agreements under administration. It was the other camp from which the President and Defence Secretary inked secret agreements. We did not sign agreements secretly under the good governance government. When the US State Secretary visited the country under the previous government, they said that the Rajapaksa government does not treat the US properly. Now he is coming again. Anyone can visit our country under our administration. We follow an unaligned foreign policy. We are not committed to any country. This would ensure that other countries will not visit our nation based on any promise. When one country asks us not to engage in dealings with another country that is against them, is there any point of remaining silent? They will resolve their problems. There is no issue in engaging in a friendly discussion with them. It is wrong to argue that we will sign the agreements that were mooted under the previous government. We did not bring forward the MCC agreement. It was brought forward by the good governance government. Therefore, we will not take any policy decisions based on a visit or an agreement.
පොරොන්දුවක් මත කිසිම දේශ සංචාරයක් හෝ ප්‍රතිපත්තිමය ප්‍රතිහින්දුවක් අපි ගන්නෙ නැහැ.
US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's visit to Sri Lanka comes following his tour to India. Pompeo is accompanied by US Defense Secretary Mark Esper during his ongoing tour. The US official had engaged in the 2+2 ministerial dialogue with India today. The Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement, known as BECA, for geospatial cooperation was signed between the two sides. Following the 2+2 dialogue, the State Secretary, together with Defense Secretary, met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. What is the agreement that was signed between the United States and India today? The pact that was signed between India and the United States today is called the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. The agreement will allow both countries to exchange maps, nautical and aeronautical charts, and also geospatial information. It would allow the United States to share sensitive satellite and sensor data that would help India in striking military targets with pinpoint accuracy. Under this agreement, both countries will be able to obtain accurate geographical data from the Indian Ocean region as well as topographical images on a real-time basis. Foreign media reports showed that BECA is the third agreement signed between the United States and India on sharing military information, logistics and facilitate secure communication between the two sides.
I'm proud to announce today new agreements between the United States Department of Health and Human Services and the Indian Ministry on Health and Family Welfare to enhance health cooperation. It could not come at a better time. The challenge of defeating the pandemic that came from Wuhan also fed into our robust discussions about the Chinese Communist Party. Our leaders and our citizens see with increasing clarity that the CCP is no friend to democracy, the rule of law, transparency, nor to freedom of navigation, the foundation of a free and open and prosperous Indo-Pacific. I'm glad to say that the United States and India are taking steps to strengthen our cooperation against all manner of threats, and not just those posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
As the world confronts a global pandemic and growing security challenges, the United States-India partnership is more important than ever to ensure security, stability, and prosperity of the region and the world. The defense ties between our two nations remain a key pillar of our overall bilateral relationship. Based on our shared values and common interests, we stand shoulder to shoulder in support of a free and open Indo-Pacific for all, particularly in light of increasing aggression and destabilizing activities by China. During our meetings these last 2 days, reaffirmed the United States' commitment to a comprehensive and forward-looking defense partnership with India. This includes increasing bilateral defense cooperation in the Indian Ocean region, Southeast Asia, and the broader Indo-Pacific. It is important to note that we achieved a significant milestone today with the signing of the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, the last of the foundational defense agreements between our countries, which enables greater geospatial information sharing between our armed forces.
Could you tell us where this relationship is going in the defense relationship? Are you planning to buy more weapons from the U.S. like F-18 jets for your Navy? And would you be distancing yourself from Russian suppliers, including for the S-400?
जहाँ तक वेपन का सवाल है, इस संबंध में कहना चाहता हूँ
We do negotiations with whom we'd like to sell or buy weapons, and based on our negotiations, we make the decisions from who we take and from whom we don't take depend upon our negotiations with them.
देंगे ये निर्भर करता है वो हमारे नेगोशिएशन के ऊपर.
The entire engagement coming just before the US election, any specific reason or timing, and is the China factor reason behind these engagements?
As for the timing, the previous two rounds of the 2+2 dialogue were also held around the same time in October, November. As for what is the factor for holding it, there isn't one factor, there are two factors. One is called India, the other is called the United States of America. If you look at the growth of this relationship, it's actually been very, very remarkable over especially the last few years. The Indo-US collaboration can be a force of good. So in that sense, it is truly global, it is truly comprehensive, it is truly strategic, and that's the reason why we are meeting.
Vishnu Som from Newsfirst international partner NDTV reports from New Delhi.
By signing BECA, which is the last of the so-called foundational agreements between India and the United States, the strategic relationship between India and the US is stronger than ever before. This is a point which was reiterated by the defense and foreign ministers of both sides. Mike Pompeo, in fact, spoke about how big things are happening in the context of the India-US relationship. He spoke about the Galwan situation, 20 Indian soldiers killed over there. He said that the US will stand with India. He said that the Chinese Communist Party is no friend to democracy or of transparency. So there was that rhetoric at a broader level, but on the ground in terms of some of the agreements signed, they were fairly substantive. Security across the maritime sphere, bilateral cooperation across the region, information sharing through BECA, the Basic Exchange of Cooperation Agreement, which is a geospatial information sharing document, secure communications capability between not just the armed forces operating on both sides, but also secure communications between the security leadership of both sides. And India and the US are now looking at the equation from an across the region perspective, the entire Indo-Pacific. With this, again, just to reiterate, India and the US closer than ever before in the diplomatic and strategic relationship. Quite clearly, China will be wary of what is taking place over here, given that a lot of the remarks made by the US leadership were specific to China and Chinese expansionism in this region. In New Delhi, Vishnu Som for NDTV.
While everyone's focus was on the arrival of the U.S. Secretary of State, operations at the East Container Terminal, which was suspended for a period of 5 years, resumed today. The tripartite agreement between India, Japan and Sri Lanka to implement operations at the East Container Terminal was a much discussed matter during the previous government. Port trade unions even launched a strike demanding that the East Container Terminal should come under the purview of the Ports Authority. A cargo vessel from the Mediterranean Shipping Company reached the East Container Terminal today to inaugurate operations.
පමණ කාලයක් තිස්සේ අපි දන්නවා කොළඹ නැගෙනහිර පර්යන්තය වහලා තිබුණේ.
We know that operations at the East Container Terminal was suspended for 5 years. We commenced operations today. Only 40% of the total construction of the ECT was completed. We hope to make the maximum out of what has been completed. The current limited capacity in the port is a huge obstacle, and this will no doubt benefit us to a certain extent.
එහි ප්‍රථම නැව හැටියට මෙතෙන්ට පැමුණුනේ MSC කියන shipping line එකේ නැවක්.
The cargo vessel with a Liberian flag was transporting goods from South Africa to China.
Sri Lanka has only one choice, and that is to defend the national interests of Sri Lanka. And our national interests are to defend our sovereignty, our independence and our territorial integrity. That is the priority. It should be Sri Lanka first. And how are we going to defend these interests of Sri Lanka? It's only through a multilateral mechanism, not alone. Now the United States wants to deal with countries bilaterally, simply because it is a hegemonic power, and it can put pressure and coerce smaller countries into forcing us into join them or signing an agreement or going into war with them. So we cannot deal with countries bilaterally, but we can do it only within a multilateral forum.
In more local news now, Sri Lanka recorded 3 COVID-19 deaths today, raising the number of deaths due to the virus to 19. The deceased individuals included a 41-year-old resident of Jayala and 2 residents of Colombo, including a 19-year-old male and an 87-year-old female. The Health Ministry said that 1 patient had died while receiving treatment at the IDH hospital, while 2 had been receiving treatment at the Colombo General Hospital. Meanwhile, Army Commander Lieutenant General Shavendra Silva said that stores and pharmacies in areas that are under curfew in the Gampaha and Kaltara districts will be allowed to remain open on Mondays and Thursdays from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. He added that shops and pharmacies in areas that are under curfew in the Colombo and Kurunegala districts will be kept open every Tuesday and Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Why was Hatton declared an isolated area? The Hatton area was declared as an isolated area today. Army Commander Lieutenant General Shavendra Silva said that this decision had been enforced with immediate effect. Life amidst the quarantine curfew. 64 police jurisdictions in the country are currently under quarantine curfew. Police spokesperson DIG Ajit Rohana informed the public to avoid visiting the bus stands and railway stations in Petta and Colombo Fort, as public transport services will not be in operation in these areas. Accordingly, buses due to travel along the Petta route were seen transporting passengers around Colombo Town Hall and its surrounding areas. What is the situation in the Gampaha district? Stores, pharmacies and banks in the district that were kept open yesterday remained closed today. What is the situation at the Kuliapitiya Hospital? Following the detection of a COVID-19 patient at the Kuliapitiya Teaching Hospital, an employee attached to the facility had tested positive for the virus. The director of the hospital confirmed that the infected employee had been serving as a nurse. The situation in the Chilov town. This was the situation in the Chilov town today. Streets were deserted this morning after the main fish market and the vegetable market were closed down due to COVID-19 fears. Have police officers in the Western Province been infected? 17 police officers in the Western Province have tested positive for COVID-19. Police spokesperson DIG Ajit Rohana said that this includes police special task force personnel. He added that 180 police officers are currently at quarantine centres. It was announced the first contacts of any positive COVID-19 affectee would be placed under self-quarantine in their respective homes. Home quarantine refers to keeping visibly healthy, possible high-risk contacts separately at non-healthcare settings. High-risk contacts include individuals returning to Sri Lanka from countries where local transmission has been established for COVID-19 and those who had maintained close contact or diagnosed case of COVID-19. According to the epidemiology unit, the following measures are expected to be followed under this concept. Consider to allocate a separate room with adequate ventilation at home if possible, and household members should stay in another room or be separated from the person ordered to be placed in home quarantine. Maintain at least 1 meter distance from family members. Preferably, household members should use a separate bathroom, but if sharing the same bathroom, cleaning of taps, doorknobs and utensils with soap and water are a requirement. Need to minimize visitors to home, and the person ordered to be placed in home quarantine should not face any visitors. Frequent hand washing with soap and water for at least 20 seconds at a time, and maintain alcohol-based hand hygiene in instances where hand washing facilities are inadequate. Avoid touching eyes, nose and mouth with unwashed hands. A home quarantine person is expected to monitor body temperature using a
Is it risky for contacts of COVID-19 infected patients to undergo quarantine at their homes?
විතර අහන දෙයක් නිවෙස්වල නිරෝධායනය කිරීම නිසා අවට නිවෙස්වල ඉන්න අයට තර්ජනයක් ඇතියි.
A frequently asked question is whether the virus can be transmitted to a neighboring residence when a person undergoes quarantine at one's home. That is a myth. There is no possibility that the virus could be transmitted through the atmosphere in the environment. Anyone will not be infected by the virus through the air. Always keep in mind that it is not the infected individuals but their associates who are directed to undergo quarantine.
අනික හොඳට මතක තියාගන්න නිරෝධායනට ලක් කරන්නේ රෝගීන් නොවේ ආශ්‍රිතයින්.
Dr. Asila Gunawardana has been appointed as the new Director General of Health Services in the country. Dr. Gunawardana had been serving as the Director of the Kalabovila Teaching Hospital at the time of his new appointment. The newly appointed Health Chief holds a postgraduate degree in Business Administration from the Open University of Sri Lanka and Buddhist Studies from the University of Kelaniya. Dr. Gunawardana served as the District Medical Officer at the Bada Kumbur Hospital in Mundragal in 1994 and also served as the Badula Regional Medical Officer for Maternal and Child Health. Sri Lanka's rat fever cases have reached a decade high in 2020 amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Official figures show that leptospirosis cases recorded during the first 10 months of 2020 have increased by 64% when compared to the same period last year. Health Ministry figures show that 6,716 patients have been diagnosed with rat fever by October this year. The second highest cases of rat fever in a single year had been recorded in 2011, with the tally standing at 6,689. Leptospirosis, commonly known as rat fever, is spread mainly by contact with water or soil contaminated by the urine of infected animals. The Ratnapura district has recorded 1,389 patients, accounting to 20.6% of the total cases identified so far this year. The Health Ministry's Epidemiology Unit said that the individuals infected with leptospirosis must be treated immediately with antibiotics. Abrupt onset of fever, headache, muscle tenderness and jaundice are some symptoms of the disease that appear within 5 to 14 days of being infected. The Board of Investment has approved a feasibility study to be carried out for an electric train project in the country.
Reports showed that the Board of Investment had approved a feasibility study to be carried out on the project valued at $2.7 billion. The electrical train project will be introduced by connecting the Bandaranaike International Airport, Colombo Port City and Mattala International Airport.
And that's the wrap of this edition of Primetime News. For the Newsfirst team, I am Azra Hassan. Thank you very much for joining us. Take care and good night.